Welcome back to the Pro Football Network's recap of the 2021 NFL Draft. We are doing this by division, and this week we have the NFC South. Tony, who do you think out of this group had the best draft?
Oh, in my opinion, hands down, it was the Carolina Panthers. Carolina Panthers had one of my favorite drafts of all the 32 teams. But the Buccaneers did a good job. But I think, except for the New Orleans Saints, I think every team, and we'll get to them, I think every team in the South did a good job. But hands down, Carolina was my favorite.
Awesome. So we're going to start off. We're going to continue to do these like we did with the last episode, doing the NFC North. We will go in alphabetical order, starting with the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, they took Kyle Pitts in the first round. Richie Grant was one of my pet cats throughout the draft process. How do you feel they did overall?
I think they did a solid job from start to finish. I mean, in Kyle Pitts, they got a once-in-a-generation tight end. I said that Kyle Pitts was basically the Trevor Lawrence of tight ends in this year's draft. He's all he's cracked up to be. I would have liked to know how deeply they explored looking at a quarterback. I would have liked to know how deeply, and the truth as far as how deeply they explored trade offers and if they got any. I don't know that we'll ever know that. I know that the owner was in favor of Kyle Pitts. The bottom line is this. I would have probably liked to see in Atlanta maybe trade down a few spots to get a quarterback, but they made a great selection. I mean, Kyle Pitts was my fourth rated player in this draft. They were selecting for. He's an outstanding tight end that can revolutionize the position, and I think he's a good fit for that offense. Richie Grant was a guy who I absolutely loved literally for the past 2 years, and I've talked highly about him. If you go back and you read my stuff on Pro Football Network over the summer while scouts were grading him as a free agent, I had him as a third-round pick. He's been a consistent player at Central Florida. I think he really started to take off at the Senior Bowl, where he had 3 great days of practice, was intercepting passes every single day. And it was not just opportunistic interceptions. It was interceptions where he was affording good coverage, either in the middle of the field or out to the flanks. Not the fastest guy in the world, but just a smart, tough, heady football player. Round 3, they selected Jalen Mayfield, a guy who a lot of people thought at one point in time was going to be a first-round pick. He fell because, number one, he didn't play all that well in 2020. He didn't play all that much in 2020. I think he played like 3 games, and then he was injured. He was initially going to opt out, and then he opted back in. And then his interviews just did not go very well. If you look back at the 2019 film, Jalen Mayfield looks like a athletic right tackle who can move over to the left side. Think of Tevin Jenkins, the guy that the offensive tackle, the Chicago Bears, selected in the second round. I don't know what the plans are for Tevin Jenkins right now in Atlanta. I've seen him on the guard depth chart. I've seen him all over the place. You take a roll of the dice on a guy like this, and if you can develop him and get him to play up to his level of potential, you could have a potential starting offensive tackle, and that's a steal. Very glad to see Darren Hall get selected where he did. I thought he was an underrated cornerback. I think he's a guy, Darren Hall, the corner from San Diego State. He's probably the player that is going to break the mold of San Diego State defensive backs who come into the league with all kinds of hype and then basically fall flat on their face. They're terrible. Hall's not that type of player. He is a good football player. He's a good athlete. I think he's a guy that's going to play in nickel packages, could eventually develop into a starter. Drew Dorman was someone there were a variety of opinions on Dorman in the scouting community. If you were looking for his own blocking center, Dorman's your guy. He's not a big guy. He's not a strong guy. He gets overrun in the middle line at times. But if you give him a running start, he gets out to the second level, and he can take opponents out in motion. He's a tremendous zone blocking lineman. It's going to be interesting to see how he does, especially since they took Matt Hennessy from Temple in the 3rd round last year. And Hennessy last year, I believe, ended up starting or being number 1 on the depth chart for the Falcons. They drafted some defensive linemen in round 5. I like Taquan Graham, TQ Graham, however you like to say his name, is a 3-technique tackle and an athletic type of guy. The Notre Dame kid, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce because I'll butcher that one beyond all recognition, is a good pass rusher. Avery Williams in round 5 was an interesting pick. I didn't think he was going to get selected. He's a solid cornerback. I'm sure they drafted Avery Williams as much for his return skills as they did for his defensive back skills, because he is a game-breaking punt returner and kick returner, although there's not too much kick returning going on these days in the NFL. But he's that type of special teams guy. I love the pick of Frank Darby in the 6th round. I think this could be a home run for the Falcons, though they really don't need another receiver. But the fact is this, Darby is a consistent receiver. He's got outstanding hands. He showed flashes in 2019 when Arizona State had two real good starting receivers, one who went in the first round, a guy by the name of Brandon Ayuk. He showed flashes this year, although the Arizona State season, I think they played 3 or 4 games because the Pac-12 started so late, and then there were COVID issues with them and their opponents, so it was a week-to-week basis. They really didn't, they had a fraction of a season, but Darby can play. So I think he's a guy that if he doesn't make the active roster, you're looking at a developmental guy on the practice squad who will make somebody's active roster in some way, shape, or form.
And so you look at the UDFA signings, and it seems like it reads like a CVS receipt. There were, I believe, like 19 UDFA signings for the Atlanta Falcons. Which ones really stand out to you, Tony?
Yeah, CVS receipt, or maybe better yet, a receipt from the United States Postal Service. If you ever get one of them, they're like 3 miles long. There's a ton of guys on here. I'm going to pull out 2 small school guys that Atlanta Falcon fans, if they go to Pro Football Network, you will be able to get scouting reports on these guys. That is Jack Batho of South Dakota School of Mines and Keon Smith from Fayetteville State. Batho played a little bit this year. He is a big, massive, wide-bodied right tackle prospect who may kick inside the guard. I don't know that he's going to make the active roster. At the very least, I think he's a practice squad developmental guy. Keon Smith, I had him graded as draftable until the very end when I had to take some guys off my list just for numbers, and Keon Smith didn't play last year. Keon Smith was well thought of in scouting circles. And if you watched his 2019 film, he was a damn good offensive lineman, terrific blocker. I think he's a guy who can play left tackle. I think he's an athletic guy that you can kick inside the guard. Again, like Batho, I don't know that he makes the active roster, although I think he's got the skills to. At the very least, I think you're looking at a practice squad developmental type guy.
And so moving on to the draft that you said was one of your favorites of the entire cycle, the Carolina Panthers. Do you know how close they were to even considering a quarterback? Even though I know they brought Sam Darnold in, it's not a sure thing with Sam Darnold, although they believe they have their guy.
It's not, but the fact is this, I mean, Rule wanted Darnold. You look at Scott Fitterer, you look at his history when he was with Seattle. Seattle, often went in crazy directions, or often do go in crazy directions on the draft. But the fact is they like taller corners, and there was a needed offensive line. So I'm sure quarterback was a discussion in the room, but I don't think it was ever a serious consideration. And they surprised some people, I think, mildly by taking J.C. Horn over Patrick Surtain. As I said on the show with Trey Wingo, even though I had Patrick Surtain rated slightly higher than J.C. Horn, I firmly believe that 2 or 3 years down the road, J.C. Horn could be the better of the 2 cornerbacks and the best cornerback from this year's draft. He's got that type of skill. He's big, he's tall, he's explosive, he's athletic, he's aggressive. And as I've said all along, he does a better job making plays with his back to the ball than Patrick Surtain does. Surtain's probably a little bit more explosive. He's probably got a little bit better playing speed. But you watch J.C. Horn time and time again, and it was not a good situation in South Carolina last year, where the ball be in the air and he's able to get his head back around, track the pass in the air, and position himself against opponents to defend the throw. He was good in 2019. He was outstanding in 2020, so you like to see that development. I think he's got a great amount of upside. Terrace Marshall Jr., LSU in round 2, another outstanding selection. I mean, he's a good fit for the system. He's a solid deep threat, although he's not a true burner. And the one thing we know about LSU receivers is they're better in the NFL than they were on the college level, and they're usually darn good on the college level, as Marshall was. So I think this is a guy that'll play a lot as a rookie and produce. Brady Christensen in the 3rd round. I thought they may have, in my mock draft, I hadn't taken Rashawn Slater in the 1st round. They come back with Brady Christensen. Christensen's got better size than Slater. He's got a good amount of upside. He just needs to polish his game. I think he's a future left tackle in the NFL. I thought this is a terrific fit down the road as Christensen continues to develop. He's only an underclassman when he entered the draft. Tommy Tremble in round 3, the other 3rd round pick, sort of a similar situation. He was my number 3 tight end. I believe he was the 4th on my board. I believe he was the 4th tight end drafted. A guy who showed flashes at Notre Dame, but struggled because of the fact that he was never a consistent starter because they had so much depth at the tight end position, as Notre Dame usually does. But of all the tight ends at Notre Dame, He was the most athletic. He was the most explosive. He was the best blocker, and he was the best pass catcher. It's just that they spread it thin at the position. I think Tremble's got a tremendous amount of upside. Excuse me. I think it's just a matter of developing him. And again, like Brady Christensen down the road, he could eventually be the starting tight end for the Carolina Panthers. Chuba Hubbard in round 4, I think is a good rotational back in that sort of system behind Christian McCaffrey. He's more of an interior runner. He's not as versatile as McCaffrey, but he'll give McCaffrey a breather on occasion. Davion Nixon and Keith Taylor in round 5, I thought were good values. Nixon is a tough, slug-it-out guy who'll beat you up on the inside. He's got good first-step quickness, had some off-the-field issues, which pushed him down draft boards. Keith Taylor's not the fastest guy in the world, but again, like the Seattle corners that fit, like the corners that fit or were drafted at Seattle, he's a big, strong, physical guy. Deontay Brown, I mean, a lot of people had Deontay Brown in the 3rd round. I consistently had him as a 7th rounder. I mean, people were applauding him because I think he lost 40 pounds between the college title game and the Senior Bowl. He's still just so big for a guy who's 21 years old, 22 years old. And that's a difficult thing. Good player, but he's very immobile. I absolutely loved the selection of Shi Smith in the 6th round. I think this was one of the steals of the draft. I had Shi Smith as a potential 3rd rounder. He's fast. He's an outstanding route runner. He consistently separates from opponents. He catches the ball with his hands, and he's also an outstanding punt returner. So I think in round 6, the Carolina Panthers came away with gold.
And then moving on, they went a little bit late with the undrafted free agents. They only had 5 overall, but I was surprised that David Moore wasn't drafted out of Grambling. Were you as surprised as I was?
Yeah, I mean, I had him as a 6th rounder, I believe. He had 3 good days of practice. It's sort of like Deontay Brown in the sense that he's kind of a short, wide-bodied blocker. Not an overly mobile guy, more mobile than Deontay Brown, but you're not really going to use him in a zone blocking system. I thought he was worth a 6th round pick. The Panthers scooped him up as a UDFA. I thought that was a great move. Same thing with Patty Fisher. I mean, Patty Fisher is good at what he does, stuffing the run and playing inside the box. He's not great in pursuit. He's not great in coverage. But if you need an 8th linebacker, a guy like Patty Fisher, he'll come in and do a good job for you and not cost you a whole lot of money.
The New Orleans Saints, and you brought them up very quickly when you were talking about the overall draft of the NFC South. Was there anything particular from this group that you didn't like?
It's tough to say I didn't like it, but, when everyone thinks that the Saints are going right, they go left. I mean, last year, everyone thinks Jordan Love is going to be their pick. Jordan Love is the perfect fit there. They take the offensive lineman from Michigan when they really didn't need the offensive lineman from Michigan, who was a center who they moved to guard, who didn't live up to expectations. So it was sort of the same situation this year. I mean, they take Peyton Turner in round 1, which I think shocked a lot of people. I'd been reporting on Pro Football Network in the days up to the draft that Turner was moving up draft boards. He was getting 1st round consideration. I thought if there was a team that was going to pull the trigger on him in round 1, it would have been the last team from the NFC South that we haven't covered, the Tampa Bay Bucs. The Saints beat them to it, as they usually do. It was just a surprising pick. I don't know that it was a necessary pick. You got Cameron Jordan there. They made that big trade for Marcus Davenport a couple of years ago. That really hasn't panned out. I think what happens is when you expend all this draft capital on one position, you end up creating holes in other areas of your team. So I was surprised by it. I thought maybe they should have looked cornerback, which they did later on. Maybe receiver, because there were a couple of good receivers. I like Peyton Turner. I just don't know that he was that outstanding that they should have used their 1st round pick, the 28th pick of the draft on him. I did, though, love the pick of Pete Werner of Ohio State in round 2. Pete Werner, in my opinion, was one of the most underrated linebackers in this year's draft. He's a 3-down guy. He's not a flashy guy. He can blitz the quarterback, but he's not going to make a lot of highlight reel type of plays where he's knocking the quarterback out. But he's outstanding in coverage. He's outstanding in space. Saints fans, go back and watch the 2019 game against Penn State, where he was matched up against Pat Fryermuth and did just a terrific job. Paulson Adebo in round 3, a guy who's got a great amount of upside, a long, lanky corner who played great as a sophomore, struggled in 2019. A lot of people remember that game against Gabe Davis Central Florida at the beginning of the season where Gabe Davis just pounded Paulson Adebo, but he did come back and play relatively well, opted out last year. Interesting guy's got a good head on his shoulders, got a good amount of upside. It's just harvesting that upside out of him. Ian Book, I thought was an interesting pick in round 4. I mean, he is the type of quarterback that Sean Payton is going to like and is going to use. I just don't know that he's going to get much playing time with what they have on the depth chart. I mean, I think that Ian Book is actually a better passer than Taysom Hill. Doesn't have as strong an arm, but he's a better passer in the short and intermediate passing game. He's also nimble on his feet like Taysom Hill. So that's something to watch. Landon Young is a bigger offensive tackle. A little bit surprised with the Kawaan Baker selection at South Alabama. I think you could sign him as an undrafted free agent. He was a guy who was solid in 2019, really didn't live up to expectations, dropped a lot of passes. At times he looked like he'd rather be out fishing or hunting or doing something else rather than playing football.
And speaking of their UDFAs, are there any names that really, call out to you from this group?
I think a lot of ways the Saints probably did a better job signing their UDFAs than they did in the draft. I mean, they get Bryce Thompson of Tennessee, who's probably a middle round pick. He's a good cornerback, had some off the field issues that just scared people away. They weren't consistent, but you can look them up for yourself. And I think that was a concern. Dylan Soner was a nice selection as a potential third tight end. Although again, they've got a lot of good tight ends. Soner's a guy who's a terrific blocker, solid pass catcher, not a downfield threat, but a number 3 tight end. Josiah Bronson of Washington, I thought was an outstanding signing. He is a quick, explosive 3 technique type who needs space to work. He's more of a 1-gap defensive lineman, but he's very athletic. Trill Williams of Syracuse, I think a lot of people were surprised that he fell out of the draft. There were some scouts that were giving him 3rd-round grades. He's got size, he's got decent speed, he just needs to complete his game.
And moving on to the Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, Super Bowl champions usually don't have a ton of needs, but when I looked at this team in the offseason, I didn't see much of anything that they needed. With a team like that, is it really just BPA, or is it go for, looking in towards the future? And how do you think that they did with their plan?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, you got to go best player available, but if the best player available is receiver, and in the case of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you don't need a receiver. You're not taking one early, except maybe if you feel you're going to lose Chris Evans after the 2020 season, but somehow the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are able to weave magic and they don't seem to lose anybody. So really, I think the Buccaneers draft was made in the offseason when they were able to bring everybody back, which no one thought was possible. If you're able to follow that, more power to you. But anyway, they needed a pass rusher. I mentioned Peyton Turner at the end of round 1. He wasn't there, so they went with Joe Tryon, who I think is a good fit for the system. I had Tryon graded a little bit later, but this is what a Super Bowl team does. They take risks like this. Tryon's got a tremendous amount of upside. He showed flashes of dominance in 2019, opted out last year. He's got a high upside, but he's not there yet. And again, when you're the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you're not relying on Joe Tryon to come in on an every down basis or even an every down passing basis to be your edge rusher. You can pick and choose his spots and help him come along. I thought Kyle Trask in round 2 was a sensational pick. I believe I had Kyle Trask mocked to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in my final mock draft, one of the few picks I got right. But I think it's a perfect fit there. I mean, he gets to develop behind Tom Brady. He plays the Bruce Arians type of system. He's more of your pocket passer, which is what Arians like, which is what Tom Brady is. He's a smart guy, which is what Tom Brady is, which is what Arians like. He's an accurate passer. I think this guy checks all the boxes. And again, he's going to play behind Tom Brady for at least a year, probably 2 years. Robert Hainsey of Notre Dame, I think, adds depth to the offensive line. Jalen Darden of North Texas, I think, was an interesting 4th-round pick. He's a slot receiver who'll do an outstanding job as a return specialist. I think he can make it as a number 5 receiver. KJ Britt, more of a 2-down run defender. The 5th-round pick, Chris Wilcox of Brigham Young, guy who I think is probably destined for the practice squad. He's big, he's physical, he's fast, but he's got to develop his game. And then they come with Mr. Irrelevant, Grant Stewart, the last pick of the draft, the linebacker from Houston, the guy who plays like his hair's on fire. Wouldn't surprise me if Grant Stewart makes the Tampa Bay active roster, more so as a special teams demon, more so as your coverage unit's gunner, a guy that, just flies down the field and sacrifices his body on kick and punt returns. I thought it was a terrific job by a team that not only won the Super Bowl, but brought everybody back. Hats off to the Buccaneers and their fans.
Yeah, the ability for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to go out and actually get all their guys back was unbelievable to me. Are there any UDFA signings that really jump out to you for the Bucs?
Well, Jose Borregales of Miami, a lot of people thought that he was the best kicker in the draft. I did not. But I still have him as draftable, gave him a draftable grade. I don't know that he's going to make the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. I think he will make some teams' roster next year, whether it's the Buccaneers or otherwise. I also like Lawrence White of Iowa State. Again, a guy who maybe he makes the roster. If he doesn't make the roster, he's a practice squad guy, someone who wasn't even graded by scouts. But if you watch the Iowa State film the past 2 years, White was a guy who was constantly around the ball, making positive plays. Good run defender, solid against in coverage between the numbers, facing the action. You're looking at him as your fourth safety, special teams type of guy.
And that's it. That wraps up the NFC South Draft recap with Tony Pauline. Tony, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for dropping all of the knowledge that you have on our heads. We will be back with another edition of this soon.